In high school, my parents kicked me out because of a nasty rumor that wasn't even true, but years later when they saw me on TV, they came calling with their demands. From a young age, it was clear to my parents that my twin brother and I were on different paths. They started comparing us as soon as we could talk and walk. He was always the golden child, destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I was cast as the troublemaker. I didn't want to spend my time stuck indoors studying. I'd rather be out shooting hoops or making new friends around the neighborhood. Our birthdays always highlighted just how differently we were treated, even though it was supposed to be our day. Yes, our day, since we were twins, but it never felt like mine. By the time we hit 7, the trend was painfully obvious. My brother would have these extravagant parties, magic shows, bounce houses, and a yard full of kids running wild, fueled by sugar and excitement. And then there was me, my celebration, if you could even call it that. It usually involved a small store-bought cake with my name hastily scribbled on in an icing color that clashed with my brother's. Sure, I could have a few friends over, but it was never a sleepover, no special outings. Just a couple of hours in the backyard, always overshadowed by the louder, more exciting part of the party happening at the same time. This wasn't limited to birthdays, though. It extended to every part of our lives. The house erupted in cheers when my brother came home with a trophy from an academic competition. Meanwhile, when I earned trophies in sports, I got a half-hearted "that's nice" before the conversation returned to his accomplishments. The favoritism was obvious, and as we grew older, it became even more blatant. One instance that stands out is when we both competed in a school spelling bee. I was knocked out by the second round. Nobody's perfect, right? But my brother made it to the finals and took third place. The way our parents praised him, you'd think he'd won the Nobel Prize. They threw a small dinner party to celebrate and invited family over to boast about how smart he was. Me? I got a pat on the back and a better luck next time. It's not that I didn't try to earn their approval. I did well in school, even if I wasn't always at the top of the class. I stayed out of trouble, played sports, and had good friends. But it never seemed to matter. No matter what I did, I felt invisible unless it was in direct comparison to my brother, and that comparison always pointed out my flaws. One memory that sticks with me is from our 9th birthday. I overheard my mom laughing on the phone, telling a friend they were throwing a big party for my brother and a small gathering for me because that's all I really needed. It was like a punch to the gut to realize how deeply rooted their perceptions were. The party went exactly as planned. His side was a spectacle, complete with a magician, clown, and even a petting zoo. The whole house echoed with the shouts and laughter of his friends, constantly reminding me of how different we were. Meanwhile, my party was relegated to a corner of the living room, a few balloons tied to my chair, and a small group of my closest friends who seemed just as awkward as I was. Over the years, this obvious favoritism started to feel more like emotional neglect. They didn't just ignore my interests and achievements. They belittled them. My parents thought sports were a waste of time, even though I loved playing and was good at it. They'd mock my games and routines, telling me I should be using that time to study, like my brother. One evening, I came home excited after a regional basketball tournament carrying a trophy. I couldn't wait to tell them, hoping they'd finally notice me. But when I got home, the cold reception crushed me. My mom gave a half-hearted "congrats" before turning the conversation back to my brother's upcoming science fair. My dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. Their criticism wasn't just about what I did, it was about who I was. They'd make offhand comments about my friends, my appearance, or even the music I listened to. Nothing was off limits. It was like being under a microscope where all the focus was on my flaws while my brother's virtues were constantly highlighted. The only person who ever seemed to understand me was my grandmother. She was my saving grace. Every time she visited, it was like a breath of fresh air in the suffocating environment of my home life. She'd slip me a little money, bring me my favorite chocolates, and tell me to use them for something fun, just for me. Her visits were the bright spots of my childhood, moments when I felt seen and loved. But as we got older, even her visits couldn't shield me from the growing tension at home. It became clearer that I was just the other child, the one living in the shadow of a brother who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Looking back now, it's almost surreal to think about how different our lives were under the same roof. We were twins, Born minutes apart, but to our parents, we might as well have been from different worlds. It's strange to feel like an outsider in your own home, a guest at your own party, but that's exactly what my life felt like. It was my reality until I finally got the chance to leave and carve out my own life, far from the shadows and endless comparisons. It was during my sophomore year of high school, around the time everyone was getting into social media. Apps like Snapchat became the go-to for staying connected, sharing your day, and just keeping up with friends. Everyone had it, including me, although I had to be sneaky about it. You see, my parents had a long list of rules about what I could and couldn't do, and social media was a big no-no. This rule felt suffocating. It wasn't just about not being able to use social media, it was about being cut off from my peers. I was isolated from all the conversations that carried on after school, while my brother freely browsed the internet, chatting with friends and playing online games. I had to secretly download Snapchat. It was my little window to freedom. But one ordinary Tuesday, everything blew up because of that app. It was a typical school day. I went to class, hung out with my friends, and had track practice after school. I had no idea that my secret Snapchat would be the final straw in my already fragile family dynamic. When I got home, my phone was tucked away in my pocket, and I planned to check my messages before diving into homework. My brother was on his laptop in the living room as usual. Normally, my parents were still at work, giving me some breathing room, but as I walked into my room, tossed my backpack on the bed, and pulled out my phone, my mom came home early. Not just a little early, really early. I barely noticed her car pulling up over the music I was playing. Before I knew it, my door flew open. She stood there, glaring at me, holding my phone. Her look of surprise quickly morphed into anger as she saw me freeze. There I was, caught red-handed with Snapchat open. "What is that?" she snapped over the music. I tried to downplay it, telling her it wasn't a big deal, just Snapchat. But to her, it was everything. A total betrayal of their rules and trust. My explanations fell on deaf ears. She yanked the phone from my hand and started scrolling through my messages and photos, getting angrier with each swipe. "We specifically told you not to do this!" she growled, her eyes burning with fury as if I'd committed some grave offense. "We can't trust you!" Moments later, my dad was home too. His disappointment felt even worse than if he had been angry. My mother was furiously complaining to them both in my room about how social media was ruining me and how I was sacrificing my future for a pointless app. My father agreed and added some harsh advice about privacy and the risks I was taking when using the internet. The whole thing immediately got out of hand. Still furious, my mother began tossing my room. She pulled posters from the wall, tossed my books off my desk, and pulled out my drawers. My tiny personal area, my little haven, was being ripped apart right in front of my eyes. She kept yelling about norms and trust, drowning out my arguments. The real kicker arrived next. They concluded that I didn't deserve solitude because I had so blatantly betrayed their confidence. My dad took the door off its hinges while wearing a somber expression. That very moment. "It is a pleasure to be private," he said as the door thumped to the ground, echoing my heart's pounding. "Doors should not be necessary if you have nothing to hide." As if that made any sense at all, my mom continued. Abandoned without a door. My room was uncovered. More than with any Snapchat communication, I felt exposed and abused. My room was no longer mine. It was just one more room in the house that they could examine. By now, my brother had strolled in, interested by the noise, rather than perhaps taking a neutral stance or perhaps supporting me. He was already persuaded that I was the troublesome child, so he saw an opening with our parents. He made it sound ominous and sly by adding his own twist, saying he'd seen me talking to boys online. That is untrue. I fired back, but it was too late. Their fire was only stoked by his comments. Finally, my phone was seized for an undetermined period of time. My brother left my room in a state of disorder, his smug expression telling me he felt he had cemented his position as the golden kid even further. I laid in bed that night feeling a mixture of betrayal, helplessness, and rage as I stared at the open doorway. My parents had deprived me of my privacy and dignity over an app, and my own twin had thrown me under the bus to maintain his reputation, an app that my pals utilized without thinking twice every day. It was brutally obvious that the rules were different for me as I laid there. Had been for all time. While I was penalized for even the smallest transgressions, my brother was granted liberties I could only imagine. It went beyond privacy and Snapchat alone. It was a power struggle, and I was losing the fight to be independent in my own house. For me, that night was a turning point. Lying down in the shadows, the opening where my door was, a painful reminder of my lack of independence. I made a self-promise to myself that I would eventually leave these walls and start a new life, a life in which I set my own guidelines, live under continuous observation, and never have to defend my need for a little privacy. He was able to take advantage of the circumstances because of the poisonous atmosphere our parents' unfair acts had produced. He developed a habit of fabricating stories about me and accusing me of crimes I never committed in order to get away with everything. He easily assigns the responsibility for any theft to my parents and myself because they already have a bad opinion of me, accepted his lies with openness. He used to make fun of my appearance and insult me in front of my schoolmates. In spite of this, I was friendly and willing to socialize, so I had a large group of friends in school. However, my twin struggled with social interactions and became resentful that I was able to talk to people while he felt uncomfortable as an introvert. When no one showed up for him on his birthday at our 14th birthday celebration, this jealousy finally broke. In sharp contrast, my friends took me out for ice cream, and I had a great day overall. I'm not sure why his friends did that to him. This further enraged my brother, who wanted to exact retribution. My brother started making up stories about me at school, calling me a pampered brat. Since our parents loved him more than me, he would make up stories to tell everyone about how I was physically abusing him at home. I had no idea that he was fabricating evidence by taking things to an alarming degree. He would intentionally punch himself, causing visible bruises or black eyes. He would confidently enter the school the following day, showing off his self-inflicted wounds as evidence of my alleged violence and fabrications. He would lie and claim that the injuries were the result of harmless activities like playing football with his friends. Whenever our parents questioned him about them, people started to believe his twisted version of events as lies, and his purported black eyes gained traction. Not too long after, rumors began to spread, and even my friends started to treat me suspiciously. I initially noticed small adjustments. Friends who used to hang out with me in the hallway abruptly stopped talking to me. Invites to get-togethers for drinks dwindled in frequency. People were reluctant to associate with the alleged spoiled girl who was accused of violence, as if a switch had been flipped. I'll have the guts to ask my former best friend why our relationship had soured one day. She revealed that my twin brother had been spreading false information about me. She exposed the specific lies he had told everyone, making false accusations against me that I have never committed. She said something that shocked me. It was as if the ground gave way beneath me, a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Growing up, I lived with my brother, who started spreading lies about me and accusing me of things I would never even consider doing. I had a knot in my gut and a heavy heart because of the deep-cut betrayal. That day after school, I addressed my brother, but he chose to ignore me. I asked him to stop lying about me, but he gave me a smug look and said I was entitled to privacy. His lies and actions were beginning to frighten me, so much so that I was at a loss for words. I was scared that my parents would think more of my brother than of me when I wanted to talk to them. It hurt to be alone, especially since I'd always been friendly to new people. It seemed as though my brother's envy was feeding lies or destroying the relationships I had cultivated over the years. Show us how to start hearing about the rumors. It felt like I was living in a parallel universe where my own twin's false narratives were more prominent than who I really was. The lies had gotten bigger than me. A youthful gossip, they now shaped my real-life perception. My biggest nightmare came true as soon as my principal heard the unpleasant rumor. The principal quickly brought me and my brother into his room, as well as our parents, so we could discuss these claimed rumors. I sat there, heart pumping, as the principal demanded the truth. I hoped my brother would finally come clean, but instead he doubled down on the lies. He informed the principal directly that, indeed, the allegations were accurate, portraying me as a bully who would beat him up when his parents weren't there. It was unbelievable to me. As my brother went on to tell this bizarre tale about how I was upset with him for receiving more affection from our parents, shock overcame me. He was adamant about his story, even though it was all a fabrication. After hearing my brother's story, my mother started crying and clinging to him as though he were a hero. In an attempt to console my brother, my father said that it was bold of him to speak up and that he would not guarantee that my brother would experience no harm in the future. I made an effort to justify myself by telling the principal that everything was made up. I was swimming desperately to the surface of an accusatory sea, yet I felt like I was drowning. However, my brother persisted in claiming that I was this violent, irrational guy. I was venting my daily problems on him. My mother continued to cry while she gripped my brother and shot me angry glances. It seemed like I was up against a wall of my brother's invented narrative. My principal gave me a severe scolding, stating that I could be suspended because the school did not allow bullying. I begged him not to put me on suspension, but he shook his head, stating that he could not ignore it. I pleaded with him. I was attempting to tell him that I hadn't done anything to my brother, tears flowing down my cheeks. I was sternly warned by the principal that I would be suspended for 10 days in order to set a bad example for others and never bully anyone. It hit me hard, and I practically started crying again, pleading with him to think again. My parents hauled me out of the principal's office because they were upset and ashamed of the entire thing. I was reluctant to go. I sought to convince them of my point of view. However, they refused to accept it. We walked out of the school. My heart heaves with embarrassment and frustration. After we arrived home, everything changed drastically. Suddenly, my dad started packing my belongings. I was taken aback, perplexed, and ignorant of the situation. He simply yelled that he couldn't allow me to live in the same house as my brother any longer when my mother asked him what he was doing. I was sobbing almost to my knees and begging my brother to be honest with them. But he remained icy, unaffected by my feelings. After finishing the packing of my belongings, my dad dumped the suitcase into our foyer. I continued to beg my dad not to kick me out as I clutched to his legs. It resembled a nightmare coming to life. He informed me that a bully like me had no business being in his home and that if my grandma, his mother, wanted to come get me, he would arrange for her to do so. It seemed as though everything had collapsed beneath me. Shocked out of my own house and surrounded by my possessions strewn across the foyer, I stood there in disbelief. My grandmother did eventually appear. She collected everything I needed and assisted me in loading it into the car and getting into the passenger seat. She checked to make sure I was buckled up before making her way to my parents' front door. She rang the doorbell and, with stern determination, began yelling at my dad for treating me this way when he opened the door. She threatened to put him in jail for what he had done to a child like me, so if he ever came near me or tried to get in touch with me again, she wouldn't think twice about calling the police or the CPS. In an effort to shift the responsibility, my mother informed her that it was her fault. But my grandmother would have none of it. She didn't back down from her defense of me, stating that I was only a child and didn't deserve to be treated such callously. For the first time in my life, I experienced my grandmother's power. In contrast to what my parents thought, she trusted me and didn't kowtow down to them. After a while, we got in the car and left my house behind, the only place I had ever lived. The amount of suffering I was going through at the moment is beyond description. I recall not eating anything and simply sobbing on the bed, even though my grandma begged me to. She was astounded when I told her what my brother had done. She told me she thought I had a good narrative, and I felt relieved to have one person on my side at least. The thought of going back to school after the 10 days of suspension ended felt like walking back into a lion's lair. Upon entering the well-known hallways, my classmates' expressions conveyed a lot of information. Whispers of judgment. Look sideways. The bogus allegations' weight is still very much present. My brother, meanwhile, pretended that I didn't exist and openly disregarded me. He had made friends with a few of people who accepted his version of events and considered him to be my victim. I tried telling everyone my side of the tale, but it was always met with silence. I was a misfit, marked with a false identity that hung over me like a shadow. Everywhere I looked, at the cafeteria, the classroom, the hallways, I saw contempt and suspicion in the eyes of people. I started to isolate myself. I was straight, kept my head down, went to all of my classes, ate lunch by myself in the canteen. Return home. I felt as though no one wanted me there and I had no friends. Not once did my parents give me a call to see how I was doing during this whole ordeal. My grandma would tell me over and over again that this was nothing to do with me and that everything would work out in the end. After earning decent grades in high school, I was eager to start college in the hopes of leading a better life. Freedom was not something I had ever experienced until I moved away to attend college. Nobody was attempting to outdo me, no one was comparing my grades, and no one was standing over my shoulder. I made acquaintances with like-minded folks after meeting them. Even though my family and peers have caused me emotional and bodily harm over the years, I have focused on moving past it all and making the most of my college experience. It was during this time that I realized how good I was at writing content. Though I wasn't sure if it would be a long-term career path, I had always wanted to be a writer. As a result, I gave up on my dream. Nonetheless, to make extra cash, I made the decision to begin writing for pay. I joined a number of freelance websites, which helped me land contracts with well-known companies. I gradually began assembling a portfolio of my academic work in this manner. I continue my side business and never ask my parents for money. After college, I realized I could pursue content writing as a full-time career rather than applying for corporate jobs. My success was attributed to my numerous clients and the enduring professional connections we shared, which enabled them to enlist me in numerous initiatives. In addition to providing me with financial independence, having a successful freelance career enabled me to live and travel as a digital nomad. Traveling was undoubtedly difficult, but it helped me move past my past. I invested in myself and saved as much as I could. I've seen a lot of the world over the years, but there is still a lot I have not seen. Throughout it all, my grandma was the only person I thought of as family, and I loved her to pieces. Although Mom was devastated when I moved out, she recognized that I had to be self-sufficient. I would always make it a point to be there for her, no matter how busy I was. On the weekends, I would go see her, and we would frequently eat meals together or just sit on the porch and talk about everything from recent events to childhood stories. On the weekends, I would spend whole days doing household tasks with her or taking her for long walks in the neighborhood park. I recently completed one of the most significant initiatives of my professional life. I was really fortunate to write blogs and product descriptions for a brand that I am unable to name. When the job was completed, I asked the group I collaborated with to post gratifying reviews on my websites, and they were more than willing to comply. I then used my Instagram account to share screenshots of a few of their reviews. Working with this brand was really important, as I knew. As was to be expected, a number of other content writers got in touch with me to wish me well in my career, and even shared my tale to encourage others to read it. That's how I started receiving messages from random people who were in need of website assistance. Several of my relatives contacted me to congratulate me after noticing this as well. Eventually, the principal of my college got in touch with me. Upon noticing my success, he got in touch with me and asked me to speak at a session at the college to students about pursuing a career as a content writer. Since I struggle with public speaking, I was really anxious. But when I saw excited faces around me, I decided to take a chance and consented. Expressing my knowledge and observations. My life seemed to have circled back around to me. During my lecture, I discussed the difficulties I encountered and the efforts I made to support myself. It was, in all honesty, a really rewarding experience to empower people and support the expansion of the writing community, even with all the difficult days. As people digested it, a few of my videos went viral on Facebook groups. Having my hard work finally acknowledged made me feel fantastic. I received an invitation to appear at a local news channel last week. They asked me to share my experience and ideas with their audience on a show they were doing about the advantages of content writing. I was thrilled about the chance, even if I was a little anxious. I discussed my experiences, the value of customer testimonials, and how a straightforward message of gratitude could lead to amazing possibilities during the event. It was both humble and thrilling to have the chance to encourage more people in the profession and speak to a larger audience. When it did, my cousins and family found out how successful I was in my work since I posted some of these videos on Instagram as well, because I was excited to be asked to a TV show. You see, my parents never discussed me with anyone. They were unaware that I was attending TV shows and dealing with well-known brands. This is how my family's message got around rapidly. My folks must have finally heard about this TV interview. It's also due of this. A few days later, after finishing one job, I was working on another one and had put my phone on silent. I was shocked to see that my mother had missed 6 calls when I checked my phone. It had been a very long time since she had called, so I was really surprised to see her name on my phone. I had no idea why she was phoning me after all those years of silence. When I reluctantly gave her a call back, she answered right away. My mother began congratulating me as soon as I asked her whether everything was all right. My dad most likely stepped into the conversation as well, sitting right next to my mother. He began asking me questions about my life and general well-being, and I answered them without giving them any attention. I didn't think it was strange at first until they started inquiring about my income. These days, my dad said that since we were family, I shouldn't be ashamed to reveal them my income when I told them it was none of their business. I informed them of my financial success. My eyebrows pinched in skepticism as my mom started talking about how difficult their life was these days after hearing this. This is essentially the flow of our chat. We are currently retired. For some time now, we had been wishing to renovate the house. We don't have any more money, but it's in decent condition. All right. Our hopes are sparked by your success. We thought that perhaps you could assist us out by covering the cost of the renovations after seeing your TV interview today. We are a family after all. Don't be afraid to give us a portion of your earnings. We truly need your assistance. Do you have a joke for me? Since you haven't spoken to me in years, why are you requesting money from me? I have no idea why you chose to get in touch with me. Even though I'm grateful for the congrats, I will not assist you in any kind. My mother became upset, accusing me of being a bitch and telling me that I had to provide for the family. In addition, my dad said that this was the least we could do because, as my parents, they should be taken care of. I wanted to slap them in the face because I was so furious about this. Thinking that they might leech off of me after mistreating me all those years ago, I had the bright notion to teach them a lesson for eternity instead of just disputing with them. I informed my parents that I would only be able to assist them if they acceded to my requests. With curiosity, my father asked me what it was. I immediately made my demand known. They had to come clean in front of our family and friends about my brother being the mastermind behind the vicious allegations that had damaged my reputation if they wanted my assistance. I wanted them to disgrace my brother in the same public manner that they had disgraced me by falling for his deceit and manipulation. I wanted them to own up to the hurt they had caused and accept responsibility for their actions. Here, under my unfeasible circumstances. My father started to wonder if such an admission was really necessary. My mother assured me that we could have a quiet conversation without inviting anyone else and that all of this was really unnecessary. But I didn't back down. This was a necessity for any future help they desired from me, and it was an unavoidable condition. My dad became more assertive as the strain increased, emphasizing that it was my responsibility to support my family when they were in need. In a desperate attempt to save face, my mother reminded me of the years they had spent raising me and pleaded with me to help them. Irony was impossible for me to ignore in this abrupt plea. I reminded them of the past, that I'd been reared by my grandmother, not by them, and that they had expelled me. They became more and more irritated, but I told them flatly that if they wanted to come in touch with me and ask for my money going forward, then the truth had to be said out loud and my brother had to pay for what he had done. My folks have been phoning me non-stop since this discussion, but I'm not answering them. I'm beginning to feel guilty for even returning their call that day. I am interested in determining whether I would truly be a jackass if I did not provide any assistance to my parents. A week has passed since I last shared my experience, and I am really grateful for all of the support and encouragement I have received. Knowing that I'm not alone during this moment is encouraging. I'm relieved that everyone feels that after everything they made me go through, I shouldn't go to my parents or even think about lending a hand. I knew they would never be able to accomplish it, which is why I even put such conditions on them. Even though they may have realized by now that my brother was lying all along, I know they loved him too much. I quote, am confident they won't subject him to the same abuse they did to me. My brother texted me an unpleasant message today when I didn't answer my parents' calls when they attempted to reach me again. What he wrote was this: Hello, sweetie. It's been a while since I last saw you, but I can assure you that life has been amazing every day that you aren't around. I quote, V heard that when your parents tried to get in touch with you, you gave them a wild, alternate time. They will never follow through on it. I assume you are aware of that. It's obvious that they never loved you. They also won't take any action to harm me. I'll confess that I lied to you about 15 years ago, but that was a long time ago. So give up being so self-centered and make an effort to let the past go. Why don't you wish to support them by covering their home repairs and renovations since you were already single and childless? Act morally and become a better daughter. The message was like a knife to my chest when I saw it. The gall to downplay the difficulties I had encountered and the boundaries I had established, speaks volumes about his lack of compassion. Additionally, his attempt to put me under pressure by highlighting my single and childless position added an extra degree of insensitivity. Not only was it disrespectful, but it also showed how little he thought of me, to suggest that I should put their needs ahead of mine. I felt it was time to take matters into my own hands and uncover the truth that had been kept hidden for far too long, driven by frustration and a deep need for justice. I took a seat and began writing an email to my parents and other close family members, describing the traumatic events of my early years and the unfair treatment I had received at my family's home. I explain in the email how my parents treated me differently from my twin brother and how I grew up in a harsh and controlling atmosphere. The email went into detail about the false and destructive story my brother had started about me in school, which had damaged my reputation and resulted in dire consequences. I wrote about how, if it weren't for my grandmother, my parents would have thrown me out. By now, I could have been dead on the streets. I requested everyone to read a message that my brother had sent me toward the end. He acknowledged to lying about me in the screenshot I've attached. It was an obvious admission, and I hoped that it would reveal the lies that had been kept too long. Just an hour ago, I sent the email, and I already know that as soon as my brother and dad saw it, everything will go crazy. I will also let you know how my family responds to my email post. Since my previous revision, which was made a month ago, a lot has transpired. My family did, as you might imagine, blow up when they saw the email. Relatives who were previously ignorant of the severity of the emotional abuse and partiality have criticized my parents. Many of the family members apologized to me for not being there for me and told me they were unaware of anything. I decided to contact a lawyer who issued a cease and desist notice to my brother's parents when they began sending me a constant stream of nasty and violent texts. It was essentially a warning that if they got in touch with me again, there would be serious legal repercussions. They must have been so terrified by this that they ceased getting in touch with me. My grandmother fully supports me and believes that me telling everyone about what occurred was the correct thing to do. Since she is the only person that matters to me, I'm relieved that she has my support. Since my last post, 2 months have passed. For the time being, I'm delighted to say that everything in my life is going smoothly. My article writing business has been doing really well professionally. I'm getting more and more requests to speak at seminars and podcasts, which confirms my standing as an authority in my field. My granny and I are close as ever. Recently, I took a 1-week vacation from work to spend more time with her. These days, she enjoys gardening, and she's taught me a lot about the different plants and flowers she grows. My most treasured recollections are of the times I spent with Grandma, whether we were eating together, having meaningful conversations, or just spending time together. Since my lawyer sent them a letter, my family and I have not spoken. Therefore, I'm glad they're avoiding me. I've started attending to therapy in the hopes of working toward my own recovery. This, I believe, is the final patch for the time being. Story 2. Dad called off my 18th birthday celebration because my brother, the golden child, requested a weekend away. So a few weeks ago, I was prepared for turning 18. It's something I've been anticipating for months. Well, 18 is a big age, right? My pals and I had this whole strategy: spend time together, perhaps see a movie, get some food. Nothing extremely bizarre. It was meant to be easy but enjoyable. In addition, my father Will had consented to cover all expenses, which was convenient because, well, I don't have a lot of money yet. Naturally, though, my younger brother Matt had to spoil the whole event. Matt is 15, and the truth is, my dad really likes him. Right now, it's not even a secret dot. Ever since our mom Sharon died of cancer a few years ago, he's been Dad's golden kid. Matt has been able to do pretty much anything he wants ever since. Dad just complies with it. I'm the one who's supposed to handle things in the interim. So it's all good the day before my birthday. I'm thrilled. There's a text from my friends, we quote, rediscussing our plans right now. Subsequently, Matt enters the room and exhibits one of his signature meltdowns. As it happens, he was cut from the school football squad. To be honest, this is hardly shocking. That's not a very good athlete. Although he lacks team spirit and is rather lethargic, he loves to imagine he is. He treats it as though it's the end of the world, though he quote all fired up and insists he has to spend the weekend away in order to decompress. I'm sitting there thinking, what the heck? It's my birthday after all. My birthday. Now that I've spent months organizing this, he simply wants to vanish. I feel like Dad won't allow this to happen in any manner. Not true, Dad. It takes a dad around 5 minutes to say something after listening to Matt complain. Yes, please let's get up to the cabin. The log cabin? God, I detest that location. It's this small item out in the woods that belonged to my dad's acquaintance, and they go there to fish and relax whenever Matt has a tantrum. Matt is an avid fisherman. Actually, both of them, but not me. The outdoors and the woods have never appealed to me, to tell the truth. I understand their motivation, but why, of all weekends, did they have to choose this one? When I become 18, that has to be it. So I try to say something. What about my birthday, I wonder? We were prepared. Perhaps Dad just forgot, I wonder. Perhaps he'll notice and say, oh yeah, it's your birthday. We are able to do both. But no. Dad immediately chews it up when Matt starts talking about how much he needs this trip and how he's had a tough week. And that's when I lose it. I inform them both that I will not be spending my birthday at home by myself while they go fishing for ridiculous reasons. Similar to this, it occurs frequently. They quote, "V's been rushing off to the cabin ever since Mom passed away, leaving me at home to take care of things on my own. And I don't mind being alone at home most of the time. Really, it's kind of wonderful. Nonetheless, on my birthday, no, simply no. Matt, though, says he doesn't want me to come because he's a self-centered little brat. He tells Dad straight out that he doesn't want to deal with me. Therefore, if I'm there, it will ruin his trip. And in some way, Dad concurs with him. It's as though I'm not there for him at all. Not even asking if I want to attend, he does not seem to care. It's as simple as his taking Matt's side. Discussion comes to an end. Right now, I'm furious. I tell my father that I'll just have my pals over regardless of whether he lets me have my birthday plans. After all, what could possibly go wrong? However, my father makes a big deal out of telling me that he will stop giving me money for college if I do that. I can't take that chance because I'm supposed to start college in a few months. It's not like I can afford it in any other manner. I'm therefore stuck. I am forced to postpone my birthday plans and find myself by myself the entire day as they head out to the cabin. No pals, no party. Me and my phone alone. Even though my pals texted me to wish me a happy birthday, it wasn't the same. To be honest, I wept myself to sleep that night and felt sorry for myself for the most of the day. Although it sounds dramatic, it was a complete bust. Matt was unable to grant me my one day, which was all I desired. The saddest thing is that before they departed, Dad didn't even appear to care. In an attempt to soften the blow, he said we should celebrate their return. We're going to hold an even bigger celebration the following weekend, he said. I'll pay you extra for it. The problem is that I didn't desire a larger celebration or more money. All I wanted was to celebrate my birthday normally with my friends. Naturally, though, that was asking for too much. All I felt at the end of the day was fatigue, weary of being the one who is constantly abandoned. I'm sick of Matt constantly having the last say. I'm sick of my dad treating me like my emotions don't exist. Furthermore, this was not the first instance of this kind of incident. It has persisted since Mom passed away. Matt never has to ask for what he wants. Everyone always says, oh, you'll be fine if I need something. You've aged. You're capable of handling it. However, growing older does not mean I am impoverished. That's not to say I don't want to be taken seriously. I realize Matt is younger and resembles his father more. He enjoys fishing, sports, and other activities. However, that does not imply that I am meaningless. However, sometimes that's how it seems. As if I'm only this extra person in their lives that they can ignore when it suits them. And although it may seem trivial, I couldn't help but notice how things were different when my mother was still living here. It was her who maintained equilibrium. She made sure I was included and didn't allow Matt get away with anything. But now that she's gone, everything seems to have altered. And I understand. I get the feeling that Dad is still mourning in his own way, but he's using it as an excuse to ignore me and give all of his attention to Matt. I was resting in bed that night. It was all I could think about. I could not stop thinking about all the times my father had neglected Matt and ignored me. It just infuriated me. Not only at Matt and Dad, but also at myself. Why am I letting this happen? I kept asking myself. Why don't I defend my own interests more? But then I realize why. Dad often threatens to take something away from me, like my college fund, every time I do. And I can't let that go away. That's how I ended up being angry, alone, and wondering if things would ever change on my 18th birthday. They probably won't. Spoiler alert. So the following morning, still feeling like a complete loser, I wake up after my miserable birthday and everything. You know when everything seems so meaningless that you just don't want to get out of bed? Yes, that is true. The doorbell suddenly rings, though, and it's far too early for anyone to be paying a visit. In particular, since I hadn't invited anyone over and Dad and Matt are no longer with me. I nearly chose not to respond. Since I was still half asleep, I honestly didn't think it would be anybody significant. However, the doorbell continued ringing, as if the person manning it wasn't going to go anytime soon. I dressed and dragged myself out of bed, figuring it was probably just a delivery guy or something. Then I walked downstairs. But I'm astonished when I open the door. My grandfather Walt is seated in his wheelchair with his nurse at his side. I stood there for a moment, taking everything in. It had been a while since I'd seen my grandfather, and he never just shows up without warning us, particularly not after the mishap. For those who don't know, Grandfather lost both of his legs in a car accident a few years ago, which is why he uses a wheelchair, not long after the death of Mom. It's been difficult for him, and because he lives out of state, we don't get to see him very often. Even at Christmas last year, when I last saw him, it wasn't the same. He hasn't said much since Grandma died. Which is not surprising, to be honest. Within months of one another, he lost both his wife and his daughter. Life seems to have hit him hard and fast all at once. In any case, I'm looking around completely taken aback. And what comes out of my mouth initially is, "What are you doing here, Grandpa?" As if it were evident. Though I'm glad to see him, I didn't understand a long way from his house to here, and he's not exactly in the best shape to be traveling. However, all he did was smile. He said, "I couldn't miss my granddaughter's birthday, despite looking tired." And that's when I snapped. I started crying at the door, like really crying. I have no idea why it struck me so strongly. Perhaps it was the fact that Dad and Matt couldn't even bring themselves to stay, and Grandpa had traveled this far just for me. Or perhaps it was because, for the first time in a long time, I genuinely felt like I mattered to someone, really, really cared. It was just so overwhelming, I don't know. When I started crying, Grandpa seemed a little concerned, probably because he wasn't expecting that kind of response. However, he rolled inside and motioned for me to take a seat. His nurse, who was super nice by the way, helped him get settled, and then she quietly stepped out to give us some space. I sat down on the couch trying to pull myself together, and Grandpa was like, "Tell me what's going on." At first, I didn't want to. I mean, I've always been the type to keep stuff to myself, especially when it comes to family drama. But something about the way Grandpa asked made me feel like I could finally open up. So I told him everything about the canceled birthday, about how Dad and Matt treat me, about how things have been since Mom passed. I just laid it all out there. Furthermore, what do you know? Grandpa listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to make excuses for Dad or Matt, he just let me talk. And when I was done, he didn't say anything for a minute. He simply kind of sat there thinking I could see. He was unhappy, though. He wasn't the sort to get furious easily. But I could tell this was truly bothering him. Finally, he looked at me and said, "You shouldn't have to put up with it." Simple as that. I don't know why, but hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It's like I'd been telling myself for so long that this was just the way things were, that I had to deal with it. But seeing Grandpa say it, it helped me realize that no, I didn't have to just accept it. Then Grandpa did something I didn't expect at all. He told me, "Why don't you come live with me for a while?" At first, I didn't sure if he was serious, as I have always adored my grandfather. However, living with him is a significant step. He was serious, though. He stated it would make sense for me to stay with him because I was going to start college shortly, and my school was closer to his apartment than it was to mine. In addition, he expressed disapproval at the thought of me being by myself here with Dad and Matt mistreating me. It was unbelievable to me. Yes, I had considered leaving in the past, but I never really had a choice, you know? And here was my grandfather offering me the opportunity to leave. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I could breathe. We discussed it for some time, and the more we discussed, the more sense it made. I would have more time to devote to my studies. I wouldn't have to put up with the bias all the time. Above all, I would be with someone who genuinely cared about me. I thus concurred. My plan was to move in with my grandfather. The really bad news is this. Hold on. Not intended for usage with that word. Put that away. Until Dad arrived home, he was not going anywhere. To your father, I would like to express a few things. He informed me. To be honest, that gave me a little anxiety. Grandpa has never confronted someone before that I know of. Not Dad in particular. However, everything has its first time, I suppose. We just spent the entire day hanging together. Grandpa inquired about my academic progress, college plans, and other related matters. It seemed so natural, like the kind of talk I never got to have with my dad, but should have. I told him that I was looking forward to finally leaving home, but I was also anxious about starting college. He nodded as though he knew well. He then gave me a look and stated, "You're going to be fine. You are aware of that." It wasn't until he said it that I realized how much I needed to hear. It wasn't the same meaningless consolation that friends or instructors would occasionally give me. It felt genuine, as if my grandfather knew I could manage whatever lay ahead. I was set when Dad and Matt returned from their trip. I had no idea what was ahead, but I was certain that I would not be remaining here any longer. I was going to be free, and Grandpa was going to lay an attack on Dad. The following morning, Dad and Matt eventually returned after their brief fishing excursion. I couldn't sleep much after everything that had happened the day before, so I was already up. Grandpa was spending the night with us. He seemed laid back, but I could see he was still upset over everything I had told him. Even though he didn't easily become angry, you could always tell when he was upset. As soon as I heard the car arrive, my stomach started to coil up into a twisted knot. When Dad saw that Grandfather was sitting in the living room, I had no idea how he would respond. Though their connection has always been decent, this was different. Grandpa wasn't just stopping by. He came to face his father. I also understood that it would not be attractive. As usual, Matt was the first one in the door, looking arrogant and likely believing nothing had changed. At first, he didn't even recognize Grandpa. He simply threw his suitcase on the ground and made his way upstairs. But when he noticed Grandpa sitting there, he stopped in his tracks. He was rather shocked for a brief moment, as if he had not anticipated this in the slightest. "What are you doing here, Grandpa?" Matt inquired, his tone betraying confusion. He most likely believed that Grandfather had dropped over unexpectedly, perhaps for a joyous family get-together. However, that wasn't the nature of this visit. Dad entered the room before Grandfather could respond, carrying a few fishing poles and appearing content despite his weariness. He was obviously happy, perhaps because he had imagined that they had just had the ideal father-son excursion while I was alone myself at home. As usual, forgotten. However, the moment he laid eyes on his grandfather, everything clicked. His expression changed from smiling to worried, like very anxious. He put down the fishing rods and said, "Dad, what is happening? You never stated that you would visit." Grandpa wasted no time at all. He didn't even try to make small conversation or smiles. He glanced directly at his father and said, "We need to talk, Will." That concluded things. Just 4 terms. But the room's tension suddenly reached 100. Sensing that this was getting serious, Matt muttered something about heading to his room and crept upstairs. Traditional action, avoiding any non-him confrontation at all costs. Dad, meanwhile, appeared to have been caught in the act of doing something improper. I didn't give him anything, but he looked at me, presumably trying to figure out what I told Grandpa. I sat there in silence, biding my time till the storm passed. "Grandpa, let's sit down," he stated in a steady yet stern voice. He wasn't inquiring, he was revealing. After a brief moment of hesitation, Dad nodded and took a seat across from him. I just kind of hovered around, not really wanting to leave, but not sure whether I should be there because I didn't know what to do with myself. But Grandpa saw, and he turned to face me, saying, "You ought to hear this too. Take a seat." I then sat. I felt the tension between them crackling and my heart thumping in my chest. Dad shuffled in his seat uneasily, and I believe he was attempting to gauge the intensity of this conversation. I was shocked at how slowly Grandpa started out. I knew he was angry, but he refrained from attacking right away. He started by discussing his mother. He talked about how much he had missed her and how the hardest thing he had ever experienced had been losing her. Let's be honest, I could see Dad becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Grandpa changed the subject, though he probably didn't want to talk about his mother at all. With a serious tone that makes people sit up straight and pay attention, he began, "I'm here because I've been hearing things about how you've been treating your daughter." At first, Dad remained silent. He just looked at his grandfather as if he were hearing things for the first time. "What do you mean?" he finally stammered out after a long silence. After that, Grandpa didn't mince words. He outlined everything, the persistent disregard, the preference for Matt, how my birthday had been spent alone, everything. It felt like a hammer falling on Dad with every word he said. To be honest, it was somewhat satisfying to see someone finally expose all the wrongdoings he has committed over the years. At first, Dad tried to defend himself. He began by saying, "That isn't how it is. She is also mature enough to manage things independently." However, Grandfather refused to accept it, all the justifications that Dad offered. Grandpa fired a shot. He didn't need to be yelling, but he wasn't either. His remarks were sufficiently scathing. Grandpa then let slip the big one. With a sharp tone, he said, "You're treating her like she doesn't matter. You couldn't even bring yourself to celebrate your daughter's 18th birthday at home. Instead, you decided to go fishing with Matt." Dad's expression reddened. He was clearly embarrassed, possibly even ashamed. However, he didn't offer an apology. Rather, he attempted to assign blame. "Matt is currently going through a lot. He claimed to require this. For him, it's been difficult. Has it ever occurred to you maybe she's had a difficult time as well?" Grandpa yelled back, gesturing to me. "Will took her mother from her. However, you're behaving as though she's all right only because she doesn't have tantrums as Matt does." That resonated with me. I saw it in my father's eyes. Grandpa was correct, he knew. However, he chose not to apologize or acknowledge his error. Dad just sat there staring at the floor like a youngster who'd been caught doing something naughty. And then Grandpa said something that astonished both of us. "I'm bringing her with me," he said. "She's going to live with me till she starts college. She doesn't need to stay in a house where she's not treated like family." Dad was astonished as he looked up. With a trembling voice, he said, "You can't just take her. She lives here." "Grandpa, no, it's not," he answered with a stern voice. "Not any longer." I was experiencing a range of feelings as I sat there. Excitement, apprehension, and relief. Everything was striking me at once. Grandpa and I were going to go. I was ready to leave this house. Far from the unceasing bias and disregard. However, I was also afraid in part. What if everything became worse before you left? What if this was the last time my dad wanted to see me? But then my grandfather turned to face me and spoke. "This is not what you deserve. I'm bringing you along, and together we'll work out the details." That concluded things. Dad had stopped fighting. Without saying anything, he just sat there looking at the ground. He probably recognized he had no right to dispute. Deep down, I believe he recognized he had made a mistake. But he was too obstinate to acknowledge it. I then packed my belongings. That afternoon, Grandpa and I departed the house, and I took one last glance back as we sped off. Neither Dad nor Matt were waving to me. They never even approached the door. I felt like I was finally taking care of myself for the first time in a very long time. So, following that heated argument with my father, I packed up my belongings and left the house with my grandfather. We had a quiet drive together. I believe we were both taking in the events that had just transpired. You mean you didn't just up and leave your life behind every day? I couldn't stop seeing how quickly everything transpired. I was driving away with my grandfather to start anew the following minute, having spent the previous one trapped in a house where I felt invisible. With the exception of my grandfather asking me a few times if I was okay, the ride was largely silent. Though to be honest, I wasn't sure what to feel. I told him I was Dot. It was peculiar. I was relieved that at least temporarily I wouldn't have to deal with my father or my anger. On the other hand, I was unable to get rid of this guilt, like perhaps I simply left my family behind. It's odd how, even when you finally stand up for yourself, you still feel horrible about the way other people treat you. In any case, that evening we arrived at the hotel since grandfather desired some rest before we completed the journey back to his home. It was a simple hotel off the highway, nothing special. It was fortunate that we didn't have to carry my bags or anything because Grandpa had already made arrangements for my belongings to be sent over. Grandpa ordered pizza once we were settled into the room, and we spent some quiet time eating it while sitting on the bed. I kept expecting him to ask me how I felt about the whole incident, or maybe bring up what had happened earlier. However, he didn't. I believe that was his way of letting me take it all in without pressuring me. He was just there, silent and composed. I eventually completed my slice and began to speak. I have no idea why it simply flowed out. I explained to him how strange it felt to go and how I felt like I ought to have stayed to try to make things right with my dad. He's still my dad, after all. I should be trying to sort it out, right? Grandpa did nothing but listen and nod in agreement as I babbled. He leaned back in his chair and uttered something that stayed with me after I was done. Even if they are relatives, it's acceptable to cut ties with someone who has harmed you. He was not upset at all. In actuality, there are instances when the individuals who are meant to look out for you end up causing the most harm. You owe them nothing at all. That really got to me if they can't even treat you with decency. I had never considered it in that way before. I quote, always thought that you just had to deal with whatever your family threw at you, and that family was family no matter what. However, after hearing my grandfather put it in that way, I understood that I had an option. I didn't have to remain in an unappreciated environment. I didn't have to waste more energy attempting to win over people who didn't really care about me. We were back on the road by dawn. It took us the better part of the day to travel to Grandpa's place because it was several states distant. I was experiencing mixed feelings. While I was happy to be beginning over, I was also a little worried about what that actually meant. Since the accident, I had not spent much time at my grandfather's house, so I had no idea what it would be like to live with him full time. But as soon as we were at his house, all of that fear began to pass. His home was a pleasant, comfortable space tucked away in a quiet area. It wasn't too huge or too little. The house itself was still in fair condition, albeit the front yard was overgrown and clearly neglected. As we approached the door, Grandpa laughed and apologized for the mess. Though I'm not as quick as I once was, I get by. It was like going back in time inside. Old family photos, some from when I was a child, lined the walls, and the furniture was the same as what I remembered from my childhood visits. It has an old book and wood polish fragrance to it, and I felt safe for the first time in a long time, as though I were in a space where I could simply breathe. My room was legally my own now, but it had been the guest room until Grandpa took me to it. It was small, with only a desk by the window, a dresser, and a bed. However, it was flawless. Grandpa wheeled himself in and inquired if I needed anything while I sat on the bed and took it all in. "No, I'm fine," I replied, grinning for the first time in what seemed like a long time. "This is quite pleasant." Grandpa said, "I'm glad you're here," and I could tell he meant it. The following few days were quite sedate. Grandpa and I quickly established a routine. He was mostly independent. However, he did have his nurse visit him a few times a week to assist with things. I offered assistance whenever I could, primarily with household tasks like cleaning and cooking. It was nothing significant, but it was satisfying to feel helpful and like I was making a difference, rather than simply being a burden. We hardly spoke about Dad or Matt. It's as if we both decided in silence that there was no need to think about it. Grandpa helped me with everything I needed, including packing and purchasing materials, while I concentrated on preparing for college. I didn't feel like I was treading carefully for the first time in a very long time. However, my father texted me a week or so after I moved in. I was half expecting him to get in touch with me sooner, which is why I remember it so well. It was a straightforward message. He expressed regret. He said he wanted to make things right, and that he didn't realize how much he had wounded me. I was at a loss for words. A part of me wanted to accept him, to believe that perhaps things could be turned around, and that we could make things right. However, there was a part of me that wasn't so sure. The part that had been disregarded and pushed away for years. After all, it's simple to apologize after the fact. However, words cannot undo past actions. I showed Grandpa the note in the hopes that he could offer some guidance. After reading it, he gave the phone back to me without making any noise. It took him some time to speak. He said, "It's up to you if you want to forgive him. But keep in mind that regrets cannot take away the past. What counts is what they do after that." He was correct, too. I took a while to reply to Dad. I made the decision to deliberate things over carefully before acting. I didn't want to ruin my pleasant feeling by returning to a scenario that had wounded me for so long after all. I had a lot on my plate, and soon I would be entering college. For now, I didn't need any more drama. I was concentrating on the future and creating a life free from the influence of those who didn't think highly of me. Furthermore, I felt like I was genuinely in charge of my own story for the first time in a very long time. Since I moved in with my grandfather a few months ago, things have, for the most part, gone rather smoothly. I will not be dishonest. I initially thought it would be strange to live with him, especially in light of everything that had happened with my father. However, it hasn't been the case at all. It's been quiet, I suppose. Not long after I moved here, I enrolled in college, and it's been an entirely different experience. Although I had always fantasized of attending college, I had never given it any thought as to what it would be like to be there in person, residing off-site, making my own sense of things, and here I am, carrying it out. Oddly enough, everything about home, my dad, Matt, the house, and all the junk I had to deal with kind of vanished once I started college. I felt like I was finally able to take a break from worrying about what Matt or Dad wanted, or what I wasn't getting from them, and simply be thinking about myself for once. It may sound corny, but I felt as like a burden had been removed off my shoulders. Additionally, I've made several friends, which, to be honest, I didn't think would happen so quickly. Since I'm not particularly gregarious, I assumed it would take me some time to make friends. However, I met Kayla, a girl who attends some of my classes during the second week of class. We just clicked, and she's really laid back. Before I knew it, Kayla and I had formed a small group, followed by a few other residents in our dorm. The days of high school, when everyone was in these cliques, are long gone. College is not like that. Individuals don't hang together because they have to, they just do it because they get along. All in all, the classes are going smoothly. It's a little stronger than I anticipated, but I'm handling it. Having Grandpa around has really helped to keep me grounded. He gives me a call or two each week to see how I'm doing, and on the weekends I can always count on him to be there and listen. If there's anything I need to vent about. The stability has been a pleasant surprise. Before I received it, I had no idea how much I needed it. Of course, nothing in life is flawless. After a month or so of school, my father texted me once more. This time, the message was somewhat lengthy. He apologized for everything that had transpired before I left, claimed he missed me, and stated the house seemed empty without me. He went on and on about how he knew he'd done wrong, and that he wanted to put things right, and that he was prepared to make me pay for it. I wanted to believe him in part. I did, truly. I also missed my father. I missed the concept of having a caring father anyway. I couldn't forget the years I spent feeling unimportant, though like Matt was always better than me. I had been burnt too many times to simply go back into our relationship as if nothing had occurred. I took some time to reply. Grandpa simply nodded as though he had anticipated this when I showed him the message once more. "You make the final decision, but don't rush it." He spoke in the steady, collected manner that he always has. You have time to decide what you want. That's the issue, though. I thought I had time this time. Just because my dad apologized didn't mean I had to jump back into a relationship with him. I could now take my time and do what was right for me. After a few more weeks, I still hadn't replied .yes, comma. I gave it some thought, but each time I tried to type something, I gave up. It felt unsatisfactory at the moment. I was not prepared to return to that. Not when I was at last beginning to feel like a person of my own. Subsequently, something occurred that left me deeply shaken. While I was spending a weekend at my grandfather's house, we were simply enjoying TV in the living room when his phone rang. I knew as soon as he answered it that something wasn't right. His expression, by the way, changed. He remained silent, simply nodded and answered briefly before hanging up. "What is happening?" I questioned, my stomach starting to turn into a pit. With a sigh, Grandpa rubbed his face as if he was searching for the perfect phrase, dotted, quote, "S your father." "At last," he said. A heart attack struck him. I sat there in complete shock. I was at a loss for words. Granted, my father wasn't exactly young, but he wasn't ancient either. A heart attack. It didn't seem real. Daddy said, "He's in the hospital now. Though it was bad, the doctors believe he will recover." I was at a loss for words. I had a sudden, overwhelming feeling that I had to leave everything and go visit him. However, there was a part of me that wasn't sure if I could let go of all that hurt and fury. It had been weeks since we last texted, and I hadn't spoken. And this is it now. I had the impression that I was being put through a flawed test by the cosmos. Papa didn't put any pressure on me. He simply gave me time to think about it. If I wanted to, he said we could go see my dad. We might also wait and observe how things develop. I was grateful that he was not attempting to coerce me into taking any action. I wasn't prepared for the evening. I spent hours thinking about everything while I laid awake. Considering all the occasions that my father had made me feel unimportant, every time he favored Matt over me. Everything I had carried for so long was wounded. However, I also remembered the enjoyable moments. There were times when my father supported me. Even if they weren't often, there were times when it seemed like we truly connected. By morning, I understood exactly what I needed to do. I couldn't just ignore the fact that he was my dad, but I also couldn't act like nothing was wrong between us. I informed my grandfather that I would like to see him, if only to listen to him. I needed to investigate for myself, but I wasn't promising anything. It was strange to see Dad like that when we arrived at the hospital, in a manner I had never seen him before. He appeared worn down, feeble, and vulnerable. That's what a heart attack does to you, I suppose. It lowers you like a peg. At first, he was quite silent, simply gave me this incomprehensible stare in the eye. However, it took him some time to speak. His voice hoarse, he said, "I'm glad you came." I gave a nod, uncertain about what to say. The reunion wasn't particularly joyful. It was going to take more than a trip to the hospital to sort out the baggage that separated us both. I admit that I've been a bad father. After an extended silence, he went on. "I want to try, but I don't think you'll forgive me straight soon. My goal is to improve." For the first time in a long time, I thought that maybe, just maybe, he meant it when I heard the sincerity in his voice. I had no idea what lay ahead for us. However, I came to the realization that perhaps it was time to start letting go of some of that resentment as I sat there holding my dad's hand, for me, not for him. If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that clinging to suffering doesn't make it go away. All it does is keep you mired in the past, and I was prepared to proceed.